Greetings and welcome. We are in room 303, Senior English B, and we now turn in our hymnals to page 985, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnet 43 from Songs of the Portuguese. The first thing we want to point out are the dates there, 1806 to 1861 for Browning. Now, it's often been the case that the question has been asked, this Browning that we just finished studying, the guy who wrote Last Duchess and Porphyria's Lover, both poems about a jealous guy who kills his girl, and in Porphyria's Lover in very disturbing ways, what kind of relationship did this guy have? And of course the answer is his relationship was with his wife, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Let's read together here on page 985. Like her future husband, young Elizabeth Barrett had no formal education. However, her zest for knowledge spurred her to learn 8 languages on her own. So let's just write this down about this woman. Amazing woman. Taught herself 8 different languages all by herself, self-taught. By the time she was 10, she had read plays by Shakespeare, Passages of Paradise Lost, Milton's classic, histories of England, Greece, and Rome. In other words, she's a prodigy in her own right. The oldest of 11 children in an upper-middle-class family, she began writing poetry as a child, and by the time she reached adulthood, she had published 2 volumes of verse. Pretty remarkable as well, because as we've pointed out before, this is the time when men write and are artists, not women. Frailty and romance. Elizabeth Barrett's frail health caused by a spinal injury made her something of a recluse, but her poetry attracted much attention, including that of Robert Browning, of course, the poet who we've just studied, who wrote her a letter of appreciation. After 5 months of correspondence, she and Browning met and fell in love. Her father objected to their romance, but Elizabeth and Robert are married in 1846 and ran away to Florence, Italy, where they had a son they nicknamed Pen and lived in happy exile in Florence, Italy. In Italy, Elizabeth Barrett took an interest in politics and wrote denunciations of slavery in the United States. She dies in Florence in 1861. Final heading here, shifting reputations. It's hard for us to believe today, when Robert Browning's reputation is so great, that Elizabeth was the more famous poet during her lifetime. Let's write this down. This is an amazing thing. Of course, Robert Browning we consider today the high watermark, right? Especially, as we have already said, of that dramatic monologue form. And yet, in their lifetime, Elizabeth was far more popular. Her love story in verse, Aurora Leigh, from 1857, was so popular that the income from it helped support the Brownings. Also popular was her Sonnets from the Portuguese, a sequence of 44 love poems written to her husband, of which Sonnet 43 comes from the collection. Right? It obviously has appeared in countless anthologies and assured her place in the history of English poetry. And some people have said, this is the most read poem of all time in classical weddings. And in fact, I've read this poem before with seniors who say, dude, I've heard this poem before at a wedding I was at. This is maybe one of the penultimate poems about love. Notice right away, it is a sonnet. Let's jot this down at 2B. Of course, notice we will have certain kinds of rhyme scheme, right? Okay, so notice you will have ways and grace and days. Notice you have height, sight, candlelight, right. So you've definitely got that, right? I love thee too, the depth and breadth and height. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. So you've got the iambic pentameter happening, and of course you got 14 lines, which makes this a sonnet. All right. But let's now take a look at this poem as a quintessential love poem. At 3A, we can already write this down. We will compare a poem like this to, obviously, Shakespeare's Sonnet 116, Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds Admit Impediments, one of those great poems about eternal love as well. Let's take a look at what it is that she says about love to her guy, who again wrote the poems Last Duchess and Porphyria's Lover. She clearly had no fear whatsoever about her guy. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs, and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seemed to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. Of course, if you want to do one of those "aww" kind of things, many readers of this poem have said, this may be the sweetest, simplest expression of love from a girl to a guy that they've ever read. Notice that the poem begins with a simple, let's just exegete now, quickly, at level 1 and 2a. Notice the poem begins with a simple question. How do I love thee? In other words, tell me what it is, or I will tell you what it is that I really love about you. Notice, it's so many reasons. Let me count the ways. I can't even come up with all the reasons. Notice the repetition. We'll make a point here at 2b. Notice the repetition of the I love you. I love thee, right? I love thee, I love thee, I love thee, over and over again, right? Now, obviously there's always this question, right, that we asked, for example, when we study the ancient Anne Bradstreet poem that's written in a very similar way about celebrating the love of the lover. But notice all of the different kinds of similes, metaphors, comparisons that are going to get used. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. In other words, profoundly deep love. When feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. In other words, she says, any time that I begin to lose my faith, it's you, and it's for you that I think most highly, right? I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. In other words, I love you in the same way that I love both the morning and the evening. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. It's a beautiful kind of rendering, notice, of these comparisons as men strive for right. That's how I love you. In other words, seeking after truth. As they turn from praise purely. In other words, I don't love you because you're a famous writer. I love you because of who you are as a person. I love thee with a love I seemed to lose with my lost saints. Wow, this is fascinating. She says, she's very honest to him. She says, you know what? When I was younger, I kind of had a really profound faith in religion, and I kind of started to lose that. And then when I met you, then I found myself again reclaiming my faith. Notice she says it, and I hope after I'm dead, I can love you even better. That is to say, when we are together in her belief in heaven, right? Well, let's obviously jot down some 2A kinds of messages, themes here. They're not very difficult to see, are they, right? This is a poem that's going to celebrate a certain kind of marriage of true minds, Shakespeare will call it in Sonnet 116. True love, right? Real love. Notice she will argue that this is in the end what all men seek. All men want someone to say this to them. This is how much I love you. Notice, in spite of the fact that we already worked at 2b, so let's work at 3a. In spite of the fact that this is the woman married to the guy who wrote Last Duchess and Porphyra's Lover, which tells you this is a very interesting relationship. Let's jot down some other kinds of texts. We've already mentioned the Anne Bradstreet text that does something very, very similar, right? This idea of, to my dear and loving husband. Remember, of course, when we study To My Dear and Loving Husband, we wonder if it's legitimate or if it's ironic. We know that here, this is not an ironic reading. She really does feel this way about her guy. What is for you your favorite movie about the girl telling the guy, this is how much I really love you? Or the guy telling the girl, or the two lovers telling each other, this is how much I really love you? What is your favorite song that echoes this? One of my more skeptical students pointed out, this reads kind of like bad country lyrics, country song lyrics about how much I love you. Let's just point out, before the bad country song lyrics were written, you've got Sonnet 43. In other words, lots and lots of songwriters have tried to say in lines, I love you. What is your favorite love song? The one for all time. That is to say, the song that speaks the greatest amount of lyrics, words for you, that encapsulates the idea of penultimate or true love. Finally, let's relate at 3b to this question. What is, for you, your view about this idea of love? Do you think people really can feel this for each other in today's world. Some seniors will say, I totally get it. My great-grandma and my great-grandpa, incredibly in love like this. It's a different time. We live in a different world. People can't fall in love like this anymore. We're too jaded. We're too wounded by all of the stuff we've seen and heard and read by the time we get to be 20. Very hard to imagine this kind of love. Finally, what is for you the idea of love transcending time and space? Do you believe in the idea that lovers can be together after they die? Do you buy that idea at all? Well, there you go. Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnet 43. Thank you.